Welcome back, everyone. This is Jose Niño with another episode of El Niño Speaks. And tonight I am joined by Alessandro Fusillo. How are you, Alessandro?
Good. Thank you for the invitation. It's an honor and a pleasure to be on your channel tonight. Hopefully, we'll be saying something interesting for the people hearing and looking to the program.
Well, I was recommended to bring you onto the show by a mutual of mine, Oscar Agrau, and we've been chatting a lot on Twitter, and I've noticed that you are pretty well connected in the not just like the European libertarian right wing spaces, but also you're knowledgeable about like Latin American affairs as well. But before we start going into the weeds of that, could you let my audience know like more about you?
Yes, sure. I am an Italian attorney at law, educated in Italy at the university in Rome. And I have been practicing law since 1995. So, unfortunately, I have a very long experience in dealing with public justice systems. And being half German, I have also two offices in Berlin and in Munich in Germany. And owing to my knowledge of the language and let's say of the Spanish Latin American world, which I visited extensively about 15 years ago, I was admitted to the bar also in Spain. And so I'm a lawyer both in Italy and in Spain. And I started to get near to the libertarian movement and Austrian economics in 2007, 2008 when the financial crisis hit. That's what brought me to the books of Ludwig von Mises and Murray Rothbard and Hans Hermann Hoppe. And then during the following years, I approached the libertarian world more through the American side, US side. I went as a speaker to Acapulco, and I'm good friends with Doug Casey and his group. And then I'm a regular attendant and speaker at the Property and Freedom Society conference in Bodrum of Hans Hermann Hoppe. And besides this, I'm fully involved in the Italian libertarian movement, which is small but exists. This year, we will be celebrating 20 years of the Italian libertarian movement. We are hardcore libertarians. We are not a political party. We are just a philosophical movement. We try to explain the libertarians' ideas, and we are not involved in politics. And this year, we will be celebrating 20 years. I am the current president of the Italian libertarian movement. And especially during the last 5 years since the COVID crisis hit, we did lots of things which brought lots of people coming to the movement and becoming members. We did protest rallies and disobedience, and we have lots of trials going on because of this. And it was it was a bad period, but it was also a huge success for the libertarians because people started to understand how bad it is and how governments are very dangerous for their lives. And so this gave us a big boom in inscriptions and so on.
I'm curious about the Italian libertarian movement because I don't identify as libertarian these days, but I still work with numerous libertarian orgs and individuals, especially on anti-war issues. What strain slash branch of libertarianism tends to be more common in Italy? Is it more Rothbardian or is it more of like the Cato Institute, like neoliberal style libertarianism?
No, I'd say it's the libertarian movement is definitely more Rothbardian as a movement. We are, as I told you, hardcore libertarians. Of course, there are lots of, maybe I should say, softcore libertarians in Italy, maybe former libertarians. We have, for example, the Istituto Bruno Leoni, or we have other liberal, I'd say more liberal think tanks, which are more connected with politics and with with, let's say, yes, Cato Institute brand of libertarianism, but not our movement. We are we are very strict on the Mises Rothbard Hoppe line.
You mentioned Bruno Leone. That reminded me because I used to work in DC in the think tank space, and Instituto Bruno Leone would come up here and there. Is that much more like classical liberal and establishment? And how do they align these days? Are they very close to like the Maloney government?
Yes, they are. They are close with the current government. Bruno Leone started more in the libertarian tradition, but then during the years it evolved more and more in the direction of, well, how could I, liberal democrats. They have collaborations with the government and so on. So this is it's in my opinion, it's very far from even from Bruno Leone. At least in his last years, Bruno Leone was more and more libertarian. Unfortunately, he was.
Could you go into his life?
Yes, Bruno Leone was an attorney, as I am, and he was a university professor. And well, I think his work turns around a very deep reflection about what law is, and especially about natural law. And I think two of the features of his thought are very important. The first one is the idea that rules should be discovered and not set up by some ruler, some sovereign from above. So the rules should come from litigation. This is what he said. He said the how a rule is set up, is built, is similar to the prize, because you have an encounter of different, a clash of different pretenses on something, on rights, on properties. And the rule comes out of this clash of interests. And he said this is very similar to the market price. And so his thesis was that our system is basically flawed because we have, let's say, fiat laws. We have a legislator, which is the political institutions who make up laws and try to apply them to everyone. This is why the laws do not work. And this is his basic thesis, and he explained it in two fundamental works. One is Freedom and the Law, and the other one is law as a pretense, as a claim to something. And his last works are more and more in the direction of libertarian thought. In fact, one of his main scholars and experts on Bruno Leone, which is a good friend of mine, Professor Carlo Lottieri, he has this interpretation of Bruno Leone, that Bruno Leone at the end of his life was way more radical and libertarian than he was at the beginning. And it's similar to what happened to Sergio Ricossa, who was an economist. He was a classical liberal economist, but at the end of his life, he was much nearer to positions like Rothbard's and Hans Hermann Hoppe and so on. So this is, but the main liberal think tanks in Italy are not in the direction of libertarianism. We are a very small movement, the libertarian movement in Italy, and we are coherent, this is sure. But since we are not in bed with politics, we have no monies, no nothing. We rely on what our associates pay us, and so we have to struggle for everything we do.
One thing I've noticed, because one of the topics I've been covering is Zionist influence across the political spectrum, whether it's left liberal parties, right wing parties, the typical neoconservatives, but also even on the more kind of alternative and like dissident right parties, whether it's like a libertarian type of movement or a so-called right-wing populist movement. In Italy, has that type of Zionist influence permeated there as well, like very pro-Israel type of sentiment?
Yes, We have it. It's in fact it's bipartisan, as in the United States. You have pro-Israel politicians both on the so-called center right and in the so-called center left. And in fact, this has to be put in relationship with the fact that Italy is not a sovereign country. This is very important to know and to highlight. Italy signed after World War II an unconditional surrender to the Allies, which means basically to the United States. And since then, Italy basically waived most, if not all, of its sovereignty as a country. And what happens in Italian politics is decided in Washington, D.C. It's a very hard truth, and often it's denied by Italians who are convinced that our governments have some sort of political autonomy, but this is not how it is. And this is especially true during the last 20, 30 years. Until the 70s, 80s, we had some politicians who at least tried to oppose the interests of the United States. I can make two names, which are Aldo Moro, who finished murdered by the communist terrorists, the Red Brigades. But nowadays, it's commonly accepted truth that they were neither communists nor real terrorists. They were some CIA or Mossad Israel assets who did some dirty works, especially eliminating some politicians who weren't that in line with the United States. And the other one was Bettino Craxi, who famously in Sigonella, he prevented the American military from arresting some purported Palestinian terrorists. And it came to an armed confrontation between the Italian army and the American army on Italian soil. No bullets were shot, but at least the soldiers were standing in front of each other's with machine guns aimed at the others, and then the Americans backed off. But Bettino Craxi paid it dearly. He died in exile during the 90s because they found a way to oust him of office. I didn't like both of them, neither Aldo Moro nor Bettino Craxi, but they were I'd say the only two politicians who tried to oppose the American influence.
Of Aldo Moro, who was he exactly? I've heard the name in passing, but who was he exactly?
He was he has been prime minister lots of times, and he was the secretary and president of the Christian Democratic Party. And what was the problem for the US in the 70s was his attempt to form an alliance with the communists at the end of the 70s. At that time, our Communist Party was a true Communist Party. They were in line with the party politics of the USSR, and so this was a big problem for the Americans. It was the same years when the Americans organized right-wing coups in Latin America, and this was, I would say, it was an option in Italy as well. And then they decided otherwise, but this idea of Aldo Moro, which was a bad idea in my opinion, and don't misunderstand me. I didn't like his politics as a libertarian, because an alliance between Christian Democrats and communists would have been a disaster for our country. But we had disaster anyway, so you can be sure about this. So coming back to your first question, US calls the shots in Italy. And this is why we have the big majority of politicians and of parties who are completely in line with American politics and, of course, with Zionist politics and with Israel. In fact, if you look at what has been said during the last months and since the October 7th, I would say 90% or even more of the Italian politicians are in line with the Israeli position, with the US position. Israel is always right. Israel has the right to defend itself. It's just a defensive war against the Palestinians, now against Iran. It's they just repeat what comes from the other side of the ocean. This is what you find in Italian politics. There are some voices against this, against Israel, in favor of at least avoiding the genocide which is going on in Gaza, but they are isolated voices and they are not mainstream politics.
You mentioned Mossad with regard to the case of Aldo Moro as a potential culprit. Have there been any scandals that have gained national or even international coverage in Italy concerning Mossad or any type of Israeli intelligence services like interfering in Italian politics?
Well, there have been lots. For example, we had a major terrorist attack in the 80s. Culprits were purportedly Palestinian terrorists in the airport of Fiumicino. Tens, if not more than 100 people died from this attack. It was one of the big attacks lots of years ago. And all the terrorists were killed on the spot by Mossad agents who were in Italy. Why they were in Italy and with what legitimacy is a big question. A few years ago, we had a mysterious case in a lake in northern Italy, in the Lake of Como, where purportedly a boat sunk and lots of people died on this boat. And these people were Italian secret agents and Israeli secret agents. What really happened there is just a mystery. No one knows. And there is a constant presence of both Israeli and US Secret Service in Italy. And in part, they are collaborating with the Italian Secret Service. And, Italy has always been a playground of secret services, especially the British. They are the biggest one, I'd say. But Americans and Israelis are always in Italy. For example, when the yacht, the Bayesian of Mike Lynch, sunk in Palermo last year, the first ones to be there on the side of the tragedy were the agents of MI6. Why? This is another question. And so, yes, even United Italy is basically something which was organized and paid for by the British, especially through the British Secret Service. So we have lots of things going on in our country.
Italy has come into like international attention, like I'd say over the last decade or so, with the rise of these like so-called right-wing populist parties like Lega and like Matteo Salvini and then Giorgia Meloni's parties. What are like the origins of these parties, and do you see these parties as viable vehicles for like at least like right-wing nationalist reforms, or are they just cutouts for Washington DC and like more like the Anglo-American Israeli interests?
Well, I think no, they won't do anything good, both parties. And the basic answer to the question is yes, they are in the hands of the United States, and they will do what they are ordered to do. In fact, our Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni said it in her first address as Prime Minister to the Parliament. She said, literally, "I will do what is necessary, even if I will lose the next elections." So she stated right from the beginning that she was willing to obey whatever she was ordered. So the two parties, they are very different in history, and they are very in fact, very unlikely allies in a government. The Lega is one of the oldest parties in the actual parliament. It started in the 80s, and it was literally invented by a guy whose name was Umberto Bossi. And they started as Lega Nord, so the party of the North. And their program was a secessionist program. They wanted to separate northern Italy from the rest of Italy, which was actually a very good idea. Italy is an artificial country. We speak Italian more or less, but Italian is an artificial language as well. It's the language of culture, but then we have lots of regional dialects, which are in some cases almost mutually not understandable. If you put someone from Friuli, from the northeast, with someone from Sicily, each one speaking his own dialect, they don't understand each other. It's harder than understanding French or Spanish and so on. So that said, Italy has had a history of being divided in lots of little states. The two biggest states, or let's say the three biggest, were the southern state, so the two Sicilies with capital in Naples, the northeast, which was in the hands of the Austrians, of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the west, which was Piedmont with the capital in Torino. And in fact, the idea of the Lega to start separating parts of Italy was a very good idea because, as I said, Italy is an artificial country and lots of contradictions which come from the unification of Italy are still existent. So Italy could be a federation. It could be something else than a unified country, especially because we have the basic structure. Our basic constitutional structure is copied from France. So we have a centralistic government. Plus, after World War II, with the new constitution, we had a superimposition of some sort of federalism and regionalism. So we have regions which are like states, which have legislatures and they can pass laws. There are regions which have an enhanced autonomy. And so this is a great big mess and it doesn't work. During the years, the Lega lost this, let's say, revolutionary and secessionist stance, especially because the ideologist of the Lega, Gianfranco Miglio, who was a professor of political science, he was also very libertarian leaning, let's say. And he died, unfortunately. Okay, he was old, but he died in 2000 or 2001. And so the Lega lost her intellectual inspirator, who was Gianfranco Miglio. And since then, the Lega slowly morphed into a right-wing neocon conservative party, which is what remains. So they don't even speak about secession anymore. And their politics is, yes, let's say neocon conservative, more or less. They had a huge success some years ago with the program of Matteo Salvini of at least defending the borders and stopping the wild immigration which you have in Italy. Salvini had also even a criminal trial because they accused him of having kidnapped some migrants on a boat. He won the case. Of course, it was a very ill-founded case. But anyway, they had a huge success on this program, which is by now completely failed. They didn't do anything of the like. And I think they lost a big part of their constituency because during the COVID years, they voted in favor of all the restrictions. They voted in favor of vaccine passports and whatever. And so this gave them a huge loss. So, yes, the Lega is I think it's a party which is in a phase of big decadence. And I don't see any idea behind the Lega. Fratelli d'Italia, so Brothers of Italy, which is the beginning of our national anthem, which begins like this, is the party of Giorgia Meloni, and they are the distant heirs of the fascists. After Italy lost World War II, the constitution abolished the fascist party and even prohibited, under penalty of law, the attempt to reconstitute the fascist party. So they formed a new party, which was called the Italian Social Movement, Movimento Sociale Italiano, which was the party where all the former fascists regrouped. This party remained constantly out even of the possibility of forming a government, so they were never recognized as a reliable political party. The other parties said that they formed the constitutional arch. They were the only ones who were reliable to govern Italy, and so this Movimento Sociale was always out until the beginning of the 90s, when they were endorsed by Berlusconi. At that time, the secretary of the former fascist party, Gianfranco Fini, was a candidate for the mayor in Rome. And Berlusconi said, if I were a Roman citizen, I would vote for this guy. And this endorsement started a protest whereby this party, by the way, changed the name. It became first Alleanza Nazionale, and then it became Fratelli d'Italia. It approached Berlusconi's party, Forza Italia, which is the third party, which is part of the actual government. And basically, Berlusconi took in the former fascists. At that time, they weren't fascists anymore. And so they became part of the Italian right wing. So we have these three parties, which are still part of the right wing, which are Forza Italia, which was the former party of Berlusconi, which is, especially after his death and with very low quality politicians, which are now part of Forza Italia, which is in a big crisis. I think they are around 5%, 6%, something like that. Then we have Fratelli d'Italia, which is the biggest party of the right-wing coalition. And then we have the Lega. And this is more or less the origins and the actual situation, these three parties.
With regards to Brothers of Italy, what is your main issue with that party, and why is it just like another DC approved establishment political entity?
During the years before their big win in 2022, the politicians of Fratelli d'Italia took very clear positions. For example, against the war with Russia and against the sanctions with Russia. They always had been saying we should have good relationships with Russia. It doesn't make sense to participate in this craziness of the sanctions and of the military confrontation with Russia. Further, they said we are very skeptical about the European Union. We could even exit the euro, the single currency of the European Union, and we could exit even the European Union because it is damaging for Italy. Then they were very much against the immigration, which is basically out of control in Italy. And one of the electoral promises of Giorgia Meloni was, we will block the access by sea to Italian mainlands through Sicily. So this was a very clear, let's say, conservative position. Further, they said taxes are too high, bureaucracy and regulamentations are stifling. And so this was their electoral program. Of this, basically, nothing remains because They are willing executors of whatever comes from Brussels, from the European Union. There is no European law silly enough for Italians not to apply it immediately. For example, now with the next winter, we will have the prohibition for around, I think it's 2 or 3 million vehicles, which are diesel vehicles of the class Euro 5. The new diesel vehicles are Euro 6. The Euro 5 cannot enter most of Italian big cities, so they are made basically illegals. To make you understand, it's cars which are around 10 years old, perfectly working. In some cases, the owners didn't even pay the price of the cars, and still they are basically forbidden. And this comes from the purportedly right-wing government and from the governors of the regions, which are also all of the so-called right-wing government. And this is just one example. Whatever comes from Brussels and from Ms. von der Leyen, Italians are first in line to obey and to do whatever they want, which is very much against the program and the electoral basis of the right-wing parties. So, as usual, the electors say, this is not what I did vote for. Yes, you bet it's not what you did vote for, because what you voted for is to send some people in parliament and then they could do whatever they wanted with your vote. This is even in the Constitution. In our Constitution, we have an article which states that the members of parliament have no obligation to their electors. So, and this, in fact, is very common. They change parties. This happens all the time. So you are elected with one party, and at the end of the 5 years period, you end up with another party. And even from government to opposition and vice versa, this happens all the time. And this is considered to be a cornerstone of our democracy, that you get basically a blank check from your electors and then you can do whatever you want.
Would you say that Lega, compared to Brothers of Italy, is more anti-EU, or are they more or less the same when it comes to the positions they take with regards to the EU?
Well, as a matter of fact, they are the same. Both parties have some political personalities who once in a while say something sensible about the European Union, about crazy laws which are passed. But this just has the aim to show something to the electorate. So they have some people who say, yes, the euro is bad, the European Union is bad, we should exit. But that's it. They have no political influence. For example, one example is very, very clear. During the COVID time, we had these crazy laws about vaccine passports. For a few months, you couldn't enter a bank, a post office. You couldn't use means of public transportation if you didn't have a vaccine passport or a passport showing that you were tested, which was really crazy. And we had some members of parliament of the Lega who were very much against it, and they spoke out quite clearly against these laws, although the Lega was part of the Draghi government. But still, when it came to passing the laws, they always voted in favor. So it was just something for the TV, for the show, for the newspapers. Yeah. People could think, oh, see, well, the Lega is against these laws, but then you have to look at facts, not an declaration.
Yes. As somebody who used to work in lobbying, I tell people, stop listening to politicians, what they say on TV or what they promise their voters. Look at their actions, look at who funds them, look at who they associate with, because that will tell you where they actually stand and where they will actually vote on when it matters most.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, that's it. But it's a game that is very successful. So why blame them? They pull the stunt again and again because people forget, and
Yeah.
they do the same. And so this is
Yeah, no, absolutely. With regards to the recent, like October 7th crisis, has the Italian government provided significant military aid, financial aid, and or intelligence to Israel?
no, I don't think so. We have ongoing collaboration with Israel. Italy is an ally with Israel, but I don't think that our military aid is significant, especially compared to the U.S. aid.
Oh yes, and what?
Yeah, what the Italians did is paying substantial amounts of money to Ukraine. This is quite clear. But I think that Israel was less, but still for example, all the military support to Israel from the Americans comes basically from the Italian military bases. I think we are the country in the world with the most number of American military bases, and I think also with the biggest military bases in Italy. I don't know how many nuclear warheads we have in Italy, so and the logistic support for everything which goes in the direction of Israel, for sure, comes mainly from Italy, Greece, and in part Turkey.
Another thing that really stood out for me when I looked at some of your posts on X and Twitter is the fact that you've been very critical of the government of Javier Milei in Argentina. And he's become somewhat of a celebrity, not just in Argentina, but also in the international think tank circles. And I know this because I'm still friends with many of these people on Facebook and Twitter that I used to work with in DC. A lot of these Latin American people who just worship at the altar of Milei. Why do you think that this whole Milei mania is completely unfounded?
Okay, let's go a step back. Milei has been a very good friend of the founder of the Italian libertarian movement, Leonardo Facco. They were constantly in contact even before Milei decided to try to become a politician. So even before he ran for Congress in 2021. And because of his libertarian positions, we Italian libertarians were quite favorable to Milei at the beginning, especially when he ran for the presidency and when he made some very clear statements that he wanted to shut down the central bank, that he wanted to drastically reduce taxes, that he wanted to deregulate all the economy. So basically, we had a sympathy for Milei. As soon as he took office, whereas our founder, Leonardo Facco, remains among one of the libertarians who are very favorable to Milei, I changed my mind completely. As you were saying, you must judge politicians from facts, not from what they tell their constituency. And there, I think that Milei is an unmitigated disaster. He for example, if you look at the money supply increase during his first 1.5 years, more or less, the money increase is way beyond 200%. So this is completely at odds with any libertarian or Austrian economy program. He didn't reduce taxes. He reduced some taxes there, increased other taxes there. So it's the same game of politicians. So maybe they abolish one tax and they put another one. He purportedly abolished the Argentinian IRS, but this was a fraud because he just set up a new agency which has even more powers than the former Argentinian IRS. So this is just a fraud. Besides, he was, at least allegedly, part of a real fraud, which is the scam with the cryptocurrency Libra. There are still investigations going on, and there are class actions in the United States going on. And this is yes. It's a big thing. Sooner or later, it will go to court in the United States. I don't. Maybe they settle the case, but it's a huge thing, and I think that he has some sort of responsibility. Funnily enough, he closed the commission that had to investigate these things in Argentina. So this is very bad as well. And I think from a libertarian point of view, the worst part of Milei's policy and the most unacceptable part of his politics is his support for Israel. Israel is a country that, by any libertarian standard, cannot be accepted because it engages in continuous wars. In these years, Israel has been committing a genocide in Gaza. If you look what is happening in Gaza, this is not acceptable by any standard. And furthermore, from a libertarian point of view, the issue of war and peace is the most important issue. We are against governments, we are anarchists, we are against coercion, but the worst part of any action by any government is war, because war is the situation where the governments can aggress violently, both against their own citizens. For example, these days, it's Israeli citizens are prevented from escaping their own country. So they cannot. They are closed in by the Netanyahu government. So they can aggress against their own citizens by means of taxes, conscription, and obligation to participate in the war effort. And they can be violent and coercive against the people of other countries. So government at its worst is in war. This is why I think that if someone says that he is even a minarchist, as Milei said, his formula was, I will be minarchist in the short run, short, medium run, and anarchist in the long run. So his program was, I will reduce the size of the government so much that at a certain point we can do without government. This was his program. Maybe it's very hard, maybe it's impossible, but if this is your program, you cannot be a friend of Israel. In fact, you cannot be a friend of any other country. The only libertarian or acceptable position is the position of George Washington in his farewell address. A country shouldn't have any diplomatic or political relationships with any other country, but be open to commerce with anyone else. This should be the libertarian position. So I think this is such a big treason from part of Milei of his alleged libertarian principles that I don't believe anything more from him. My interpretation is this. Argentina had two big experiments with classical liberal politicians, which were Menem in the 90s and Macri in the 2000s. Both failed miserably. So another liberal candidate would have been not credible for the Argentinian electorate. So they needed something fresh, something new, and they tried Milei. Milei was very effective, especially on TV. He is very rude. He uses lots of bad words and so on, but he is effective. He has a huge success. He's funny. If you look at his videos in the before the election, he was really funny. And so he was the ideal candidate. He's a very good TV person. He can discuss with whomever you want. At a certain point, he can throw at you his superior knowledge in mathematical economics. He just can take out some formulas and show that he is the big expert. So he was a very good candidate, and he was the only one who could attract the desire of the Argentinians for something new, for a change. Because after all these years of the Kirchners, the Argentinians wanted something different. And Milei was the ideal candidate. So he basically, I think he used some libertarian ideas, and but nothing is left of his initial libertarian stance.
I hear some people say that Milei's policies have helped reduce Argentina's inflation rate. They use that as like the barometer for his success. How do you counter those arguments?
Well, I think this is a big confusion. From an Austrian economic position, inflation is not the price inflation, so the general increase of certain prices, which are usually detected by the national statistical agencies and come up with a percentage of increase in consumer prices. Inflation, from an Austro-libertarian point of view, is the increase in the money supply, and this is an objective measurement, and there are no discussions. Milei increased the money supply way more than 200% in his time, way more than the former government. So the consumer prices have not increased so much, although this is disputed, because there are lots of voices coming from Argentina saying that the prices are much higher and there is an inflation. Plus, Argentina has a history of manipulating the statistics about the consumer price index, so I'm not sure. Anyway, even if it were true, from an Austro-libertarian point of view, this doesn't mean anything, because if you have an increase in money supply, this means a distortion in the decisions by consumers and entrepreneurs, and the distortion is there anyway. Even if the prices don't increase, it could be that the prices without the increase in the money supply could have been lower. Maybe there could have been deflation. Deflation, from an Austrian point of view, is not bad, because deflation means that the purchasing power in the pockets of the consumers is bigger. So things cost you less. Only in mainstream economics, if things cost less, it's a bad thing. For any consumer and any person who saves money, it's better that things cost less, because you have more purchasing power. So, and by the way, exactly as the former Argentinian governments, this huge increase in the supply of pesos, of the local currency, is absorbed by a number of government bonds and central bank bonds, which absorb part of this increased money supply. But this is a ticking bomb. Sooner or later, this money will get back on the market, and in this case, it may determine price inflation. But the problem is the distortion which is created by the increase in money supply. So you cannot measure Milei's success by the fact that purportedly the consumer price index it doesn't increase so much, because anyway, the increase of the consumer price index inflation is going down if compared to the previous government. But still, Argentina has a huge inflation. So it's not like it's a country with just a few percentage points per year, which is too much anyway, because inflation caused by central banks' policies is always bad. But still, it's not that Argentina from one day to the other went to belongs to the low inflation countries like it could be Germany or the United States. You still have a very huge consumer price index increase annually. So I think there's no reason to celebrate. And then we shall see what will happen with this increase in the money supply.
Well, Alessandro, we covered a ton of ground here, and I think this is a good spot to bookmark the discussion. But before we leave, can you give my audience an overview of where they can follow your work and your latest insights?
Sure. Unfortunately, it's mostly in Italian, but nowadays with artificial intelligence, you can translate almost everything. I have a Telegram channel which is called Difendersi Ora. Maybe we can put the name in the description.
Yes, we will.
Yeah, where I cover mostly legal topics and where everything I do is published. I have 2 regular interviews every week with 2 YouTube channels which cover politics, law, economy, and so on. And then if I go somewhere, public rallies, conferences, and so on, you'll find everything on my Telegram channel. Then I have a website, which is, I give you the description as well. It's defendersiora.it, where you can find everything I did, especially legal things, legal tutorials, and my class actions. There are some current class actions which are going on before Italian courts. And then I am on X, of course, where I try to give my libertarian view on what is happening, and then I have a YouTube channel where you can find my videos. Unfortunately, as I told you, it's mostly Italian, but okay, you can try to translate it.
All right. Thank you so much, Alessandro, for coming on to the show. And to my audience, as usual, thank you for tuning in. And with that, El Nino has spoken.